Recording it on page 2.
Excellent. So I wanted to start by answering the questions that people had that you had noticed. So fire at me a couple of the questions. I can't recall all the questions. I know that I made one correction in the chat, which was that and we'll see it in this paper. It's the monkey Nazca line that has the asymmetric fingers count that matches the Kentucky rock art. But I can't remember if there were any other corrections I had to make. I did. Somebody noted that natives didn't live in perfect harmony with each other. That goes without saying. I was speaking about harmony with nature rather than harmony necessarily with each other. That certainly they never existed in harmony with each other. But now they did have advanced civilizations. I mean, they had bureaucracies. They had major empires that and many. And I contend actually an empire here in the Ohio River, Greater Ohio River Valley area, anything from the Tennessee River and possibly the Alabama River all the way up through to Michigan and over the Missouri River. I contend that there was a massive economic empire, several of them actually. And that it was a well-known area for many different peoples. The Welsh knew about it, and the Egyptians knew about it, and Phoenician. This area has been industrially mined for a long time, but not necessarily that what I would call the same kind of harmony that they had with nature. With nature, they had a very excellent management style. In fact, a lot of people don't know this. When we took over Yellowstone from the Native Americans, the populations there crashed because we tried to institute a preservation policy, and it turned out they had been managing, and all of the herd numbers were basically synthetic. They were managed herd levels, and then we tried to save the herds by killing off the wolves, and it made it even worse. And so the natives had excellent land management techniques. I mean, our Bureau of Land Management could definitely learn from the Native American way, and that's true to this day. It's a shockingly few of Kentucky's preserves have controlled burn techniques. So it's just kind of an amazing thing. And the first part of this paper, I go through exactly why we should trust the Native Americans. But on page 2, we start with the very quotes. Of course, the very top quote is a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle quote, and it's important that even though it's a Sherlock Holmes quote, that it really does reflect a scientific idea that, when you've eliminated what's impossible, whatever remains, however, probably be the truth. And that's a hard thing for a lot of scientists today. And I don't know why, because at one time in science, everything was impossible. Electricity seemed impossible. They didn't want to believe, Faraday. They just didn't want to believe him. And yet, Volta was giving demonstrations using the power of batteries. They were able to run these electromagnets and lift huge amounts of weight, but they didn't know how it worked at all. They had no clue. So science has been long associated with dealing with the impossible, and it always seems improbable. I remember there's a famous there's a doctor who was quoted as saying that it was impossible for man to go faster than 35 miles an hour or his organs would explode. I mean, it's just laughable kind of stuff. And of course, famously, the guy, I forget his name, but he was an enemy of Edwin Hubble, maintained that the universe couldn't be much bigger than the solar system. I mean, people have constantly said things were impossible that turned out to be totally possible.
Yeah, the first one is from Holistic Researcher, and he said, Ramon, could we get a copy of the spreadsheet you mentioned about calculations of thunderbolts?
Yeah, all these spreadsheets, if you look in the footnotes of the papers, there is a bit.ly link because they're Google Docs, so they are very long. So you just look for it's usually early on after something like the first table shows up, there'll be a bit.ly link, and those bit.ly links go to the actual Google Doc. Then you just file, make a copy, and you can work with the data. But the best thing is print it out and then use your own calipers and your own protractors, measure your own angles and verify everything for yourself. That's the best thing to do. Of course, you can use mine as template to see, the different divisions and all of that. But I definitely recommend that people, that's why I included those scans of the actual lines that I had drawn over top so that people could see exactly what angles I was measuring from. And then they can go and measure things themselves. Invariably, people will choose slightly different centers than I did for the middle of the mounds or the middle of the vortices. But in the end, you're going to end up with the same basic conclusion, which is these asymmetric octagons are impossible to be coincidental. Calculations of the thunderbolts, and that's also that one is in here in part 4. There will be a link to that, and those calculations are much more open for interpretation. Based on minimums, maximums, averages. You can play around and have all sorts of fun with that, and that's all contained in part 4.
Okay, Guillermo Sastricas asks, ask Ramon, why is he talking about a geographic pole? That's neat or not.
Yeah, in the Octagon paper, what the implication is that the people in the North Pole of the northern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere of Earth, were capable of seeing the North Pole of Jupiter. So that's
right.
What's relevant there.
Yeah.
Nothing in what I'm talking about has to do with magnetic excursions, because everything is within the last 30 some thousand years, and the last magnetic excursion, as far as I know, is about 70,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So if there was if we flipped over, it's because our magnetic pole hadn't yet flipped, but we had moved into a different electric field. And so because Wall maintains that Jupiter and Saturn have a different plasma sheath behavior than the electric field of the sun, and the sun is actually sort of starving these dwarf stars of their ability to circulate all of their charge, and that's why they're not glowing anymore. And so when we move from one magnetosphere to another one, I maintain that was a different electric field, and to maintain angular momentum, we just rolled over, and that's exactly what the Bible describes. And certainly that would create some devastating effects of its own without even uplift and down thrust. But possibly there could have been buckling. I mean, things could have changed really rapidly. We don't have any data, but what we do know is that you get 3 independent cultures from multiple thousands of miles away that all agree that the sun changed directions. And we have the Chinese still revering the South. We have stories from Europe of Hyperborea, and the only landmass in the so-called North is now, of course, in the South. And we have the Piri-Reis map showing that there wasn't ice at one point in large sections of that. So my presumption there is that the reason why the Orkney Islands and all of northern Siberia used to be a lot balmier is that originally that it was at sort of the climate level that Patagonia currently is. And Patagonia, of course, sometimes can be very cold, but usually I would say fleece weather. So now we need a lot more evidence, but at the same time, we know for sure with this octagons, the asymmetric octagon mounds, that the northern hemisphere of the Earth had to pass over the North Pole of Jupiter at some point for us to get a good enough vantage to at least do the trigonometry with or without the Mica observation decks.
Right. Okay. John Smith says, "Happy day, Ramon. How do you explain the oval elliptical shape of the Carolina Bays? Isn't it supposed to be the thunderbolts create circular craters? Couldn't
I
some of
think
them
that
been created by meteors?"
um, you know, a couple of them appear like they might have a bow shock, but I haven't seen any of them have
Well, they
quite
are
the bow shock
raised on the southeastern corner
on
more than
some.
the
Yeah, on some.
yeah. Hmm.
Right, but the problem
Southwest.
is they don't show any of the other features that you expect out of astrobleams. And when we get to part later in this paper, we're going to cover the Carolina Bays. So I want to return to that. But
Oh,
as far as why, I mean, the question is, you know, why do some arc discharges form hexagons and some octagons and some form, you know, squares and some bullseyes and some crater rim discharges? Electricity behaves in different ways, and it's probably a different tablet of destiny, a different stamp. The asymmetric octagon from here in Kentucky, I'm maintaining is either from the moon moving close to us on behest of Jupiter, or it may be a stamp actually caused by Jupiter itself, because the asymmetric octagon shows up on Jupiter. So we see concordance there between the religion, the North Pole, and the shape of the bolt at Big Sink. So I assume that different bodies left different stamps, and that the people themselves would get up on cliffs and look at it, and then they would say, well, this god placed its stamp here, and so this is the age that we live in. That's my
mhm.
presumption. I don't know.
Okay. Chris Newberry says, "I'm familiar with Wilson and Blackett. There was another guy he mentioned, and this is driving me nuts. It's Lee Pennington, is who you
Oh, well,
was."
Lee's president of the AKHA, but he didn't write a book on this. Jim Michaels wrote a book of the glyphs in Kentucky, and Jim Michaels went and brought Wilson and Blackett to Kentucky, and they actually went out on an expedition and found undiscovered Welsh runes, and Lee Pennington recorded them, and they ended up in my paper, and they've been since destroyed. I am sad to report that a lot of the things in my paper were given to me by Lee. If people
Hmm.
want to see, Lee has really great videos like Welsh history and bondage. He has a video where he's gone into the Bosnian pyramids. He's got Gunung Padang. He's got all sorts of stuff. They go to Jolie Productions or JOLE Productions, and they can find his DVDs, or they can go to the Ancient Kentucky website and get links from there. That's akha.us, and it's a great thing to, you know, it's a very cheap membership, you know, and we have meetings 11 times a year in the Louisville area, and it's sort of harkens back to the old days when the founding fathers used to get together in the Louisville area to discuss the matters of the Welsh Indians and of the various stone forts. And when we do the episode on the Welsh, people are going to learn a lot of history that has been hidden for a long time. And it's really kind of amazing, and it touches right here the electric universe. I mean, look at, you know, first quote that we're looking at here is Thomas Jefferson. So.
Hmm. Okay. Guillermo Arriagada asks, "Does he have any knowledge when the moon appeared in the collective folklore? And if so, would it have any purpose on mankind?"
Um, I mean, from what we can tell, it's in the Enuma Elish, so I'm going to defer to that, and I would say between 5 and 7,000 years ago.
Okay.
However, very well could be older. That's a problem, because um, remember that I'm saying that the thunderbolts are our best way for melting ice, and yet we can only extend the moon back so far. So it's quite possible that it was another body that has even more power than the moon that actually melted the ice and left even wider destruction. In which case, we would look to possibly Saturn itself, or Jupiter itself, something even more powerful that would have gotten close enough. But you know, when you're solving a crime, you look for means, motive, opportunity. The moon has the best the means and the worldwide stories, and I pulled them from Graham Hancock and put them into the paper here. The moon does come up a lot. However, it is a late comer as far as I can tell. And remember, as old as the Greeks are, they're actually relatively young compared to some of the catastrophe cultures.
Okay, now we hear from Black Claw. Who are the parasites running the global economy? Are they survivors, or had they escaped some planet like Mars 12,000 years ago, or whenever the shakeup in our solar system happened? So, cheers.
Yeah, I don't honestly know. I know that Mars is certainly dead now. Venus, Athena won that battle over Ares. If there were any civilizations, the whole thing would have been stripped away. I think the Thunderbolts people have it very right as far as the northern hemisphere being extremely well excavated. And I think that Venus took the carbon dioxide atmosphere. I think that's why Venus has such a thick atmosphere, and Mars too thin an atmosphere, even for a small planet. That they try to explain it with, the solar wind bumping things off, and that's probably true too. But why is it so thin? Probably because it was stolen by Venus. I mean, there's no doubt that these people think very differently from us. I myself, I'm attempting to understand the science of finance and how to reverse engineer so that we can do something, to help the world instead of just, no offense to anybody out there, but just talking amongst each other is not going to improve the situation. I mentioned to you that there was a man, Peter Sage, who tried to do a roll up and create people can look this up, the company Space Energy. And I mean, he met some major resistance. He might be a crook, he might not be a crook, and he was targeted. I don't know, but he tried to do a $15 billion roll up and create a space energy company. But I mean, that's the direction we obviously got to go. So we've got to understand finance and go that direction.
Okay, we got Chad. Does he have any knowledge on the elongated skull beings or ancient builder race, perhaps giants of some sort?
They do. They're weird. I mean, they could be descendants, as far as I could tell, of Anunnaki. The children of Anunnaki overlords and all that, all the politics of the Middle East from 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. I don't have any answers in that direction. I did compare the ancient alien hypothesis, so-called Sitchinese kind of alien architects, with the extended plasma electromagnetic cosmology to see if there is concordance, and I have a whole paper on that. Sometimes there's overlap, other times they deny each other or can't really work exactly together, and I maintain that the alien hypothesis is necessarily a pseudoscience because you can't really disprove it, and in that way it's just like the dark matter, right?
Right.
And you can't definitively disprove something that you can't directly measure. So until the aliens show up in like a la Independence Day and declare that they are our Anunnaki overlords and they look like 20-foot tall, Gilgamesh walking around, then we don't know for sure. It's just it could all be, again, Babylonian Star Wars, and the Petra and all those empty rooms with 20-foot doorways could be all built in honor of the spirit of those planets. I talked about this on the last leak project I did. I guess it was last Monday or Tuesday. And we just don't know the properties of all this stuff. It's quite possible that in an electric universe, when you have a plasmoid, that plasmoid has complexity. The complexity theory states that if you have enough complexity, you have some form of consciousness. And it might be that people in the old days interacting with these environments actually could experience and perceive a lot more. I personally know a woman who was a born natural psychic, and when she sees a plasmoid ball, it actually takes shape for her. So her mind gets information and can even receive auditory information from that. And I've got a video of her and I in a room, and a plasmoid goes right up her hair, a plasma ball, and we only could see it in the low light, but she could I could feel it, but she could actually interact with them. And so in the ancient days, my speculation is that more people could do that, maybe even everybody. It's quite possible. And I mean ancient days, I mean 10,000 years ago. So
Yeah, he also says, I believe you touched on the fact that they were known to have conducted a form of brain surgery. Did you talk about that? Let's see, he's got more here. Over
I'm not sure
2,000
if we're
years
talking.
ago.
Yeah, I mean the Chinese had surgery, but if he's talking about trepanation, then I mean, yeah, the trepanation's been around for I think the new numbers are over 20,000 years. I know that there are some needles found in the Caucasus region, I think, that are over 20,000 years old, and they're not for sewing. So, people have been interested in medicine for a long time. We've been biologically modern for a very long time. So, there's, as the Bible says, nothing new under the sun. Of course, there are many things about our society that have never been done, and there's no evidence that people ever had plastic before. So we certainly are a unique culture at this stage. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing remains to be seen.
The gods' planets, sometimes personified by ancient peoples, I would say, yeah, to that.
Yeah,
Perhaps
they absolutely mimic them. Yes.
maybe this is why there's confusion. Does he believe that all 9 planets were the original planets of this solar system? I would think not. But the
Uh,
planets are adopted from the
but
sun.
it's possible that some came with if because there's a lot of ways you can skin this cat. We could have been far out and then moved in, and that's why Apollo
Hmm.
appeared to grow like a baby.
Right.
Or Apollo could have arrived later and brought with it some there's some discussion. I mean, the thing is, in some of those texts from the ancient days, they describe that the goddess associated with Neptune basically beckoned to Nibber like a mother wants its child. So it's maybe it's talking about the sun. Maybe the sun was actually black when it came in, and then received enough charge, and then expanded to its current size. We don't really have enough, and without being able to physically probe it, I mean, all the conjecture of it being billions of years old and it's a main sequence, and this is why it's pure speculation, and that would be including by anybody. But the neat thing about Thornhill and them is that they at least are trying to do something with a laboratory to create a sun, whereas everyone else, I mean, literally, if you look into history, it's all based on spectroscopy, which originally was just burning gases. And so they went from that to, once they saw that the signatures are similar, then they just decided that stars were burning balls of gas. And then from then on, everything's been done to maintain that story rather than reassessing and going, well, maybe we misinterpreted what that actually meant. And spectroscopy got its start in 1848. We did not even have a model of the atom for another 60 years that was verified. By the time they had decided that stars were burning balls of gas, we still did not even have a working understanding of the proton and electron, and that's important that people know. And when spectroscopy started, we did not have any of the laws of electromagnetism in place, not a single one.
Hmm. And now he's asking here, what do you feel about Tessa's theory regarding Uranus? Ramon, what do you think about the golden age of Uranus or Uranus instead of Saturn?
Well, I mean, the god Uranus is definitely there, but I mean, same thing at Anu in for the Sumerians, but that planet is not Uranus. That planet was the god Hades, and so you have the four in the Greek, right? You have the three brothers and the sister. Of course, the sister is a decharged Saturn, and they're all the children of Cronus. So they only appeared once the coronal shell of Saturn discharged and the purple sky ended, and then we were able to see. Now it's not clear whether Hades and Poseidon surrounded or floated on their own. How close in a cluster were they? Because there was a brief period of time where Venus and Mars and Earth and the Moon appeared to have kind of a dance together, and then it broke up, and we all went into our separate orbits. So how did that work? Was it the the collinear alignment? That's the current only mathematical theory that is allowed. There is the possibility that some things were existing in a coplanar alignment, and the math on that is usually done with the galaxies. But in a coplanar alignment, everything is moving in kind of different planes above, in which case then we would be capable of actually existing above the poles of Saturn or Jupiter, and then moving in ellipses around. And I guess we'd be following the Birkeland current, and perhaps the gas giant, able to do that as well. I tend to think that they were their own being, or perhaps, again, another way to skin the cat is that we were with Saturn, and Saturn was around the sun, and that's all that was there. And then suddenly here comes Jupiter with its own series of bodies, and that starts the process of disturbing the balance, and starts pulling us around, and we even might be passed back and forth, hence the beginning of the ice ages. But we don't have enough data, and we may never have enough data to really simulate that, because it's, even with our modern universal sandbox 2, it's really difficult to get the angles and everything right to recreate any of this stuff.
Absolutely.
Perhaps some AI would be able to do it if we put in all the right parameters of every myth and every angle and every piece of evidence. Maybe a super smart quantum computer AI would be able to figure out the one way that it would work. But I mean, as far as I can tell, there's at least 5 different ways to skin the cat, and that makes it tough to have any definitive answers. I'm not so sure that the boundary dates are as important as people want them either. They almost assuredly are going to be wrong on account of even with the Chinese records. I mean, there's huge arguments in sinology that that can be off as many as hundreds of years for things that have definite described dates, because the way that they dated was based on the reign of so and so, and you go, well, how long did that person live? And in the years of war, dates were burned. I tend to believe the classic Chinese dating system, which goes back earlier, because that agrees with the Velikovsky timeline and the John Cook timeline, whereas the newer sinology, they tend to compress everything, because for some reason, for a culture that doesn't believe in the Great Flood anymore in the scientific culture, they want to compress everything within the last 6,000 years, because nothing is allowed to be older than Egypt, except Göbekli Tepe, of course, because they can't argue anymore.
I was kind of hoping it wouldn't get asked, because we're not in competition. We're working together. That's how I feel anyway, and I'm sure that's how everyone else feels too.
It's very aggravating, because obviously, clearly, a lot of interesting things were happening before 6,000 years ago.
Okay, 3 more. 2 of them are, how were the ancients able to record these stories from Earth, and are all of us even from Earth?
Well, I wish I had an answer for you, but I can tell you almost assuredly our souls are not from Earth.
I wouldn't
but
think so.
I also believe in an eternal and an infinite universe, so I don't know how important it is for us to be over-attached. I love Mother Nature and I love Earth, but I mean, realistically, we can't be here forever, and we haven't been here forever, as far as I can tell. But I wish we would live more in harmony with where we're at now, and not long for old planets that we used to, if there was a Krypton and we managed to somehow blow it up, or if we got invaded by insectoids or whatever we're afraid of. I wish we would kind of get with what's going on now. I think that's what's important.
Well, I can tell you about how the humans recorded him from Earth. As you will soon find out in the next episode, plasma displays were putting on a little show for the ancients. It was like a movie on a plasma TV before plasma TV, the real plasma TV out in the sky. And it was really quite fantastic what they witnessed, as you will soon see. Yeah, and Lisa Hausman, last question. I like the idea of asking about the moon. Also, maybe something pertaining to the ancients, glorious-looking structures we find all over the world, like Taj Mahal, all kinds of different things that were built before official history. So she wants you to say, where did the idea for the structures come from that are ancient?
Well, that depends on the era you're talking about. After the Atlantean age, which we don't know how advanced people were in the Atlantean period, but and we get into the Tepe period, and it appears that the T-shaped pillars were directly influenced by the thunder. And there can't be a coincidence that the T shape and the T rune, whereas the T rune is referring to the triple phase of energy, the Alwyn sign, the Yao sound, and of course has a modern sound of th. It can't be a coincidence that they're T-shaped there and at other places in the world. So I would say that's the beginning, but the megalithic period didn't start till so after the Tepe period. Then we had an archaic period in which nothing was going on because apparently it was too dangerous to really farm outside. People were using trees, and of course they probably did some game hunting, but they were living underground and in caves. And then we began the megalithic period in earnest, and it appears that for some reason mankind was able to start moving bigger and bigger blocks, and it could be that they had really advanced trigonometry and levers, but I tend to think that something had altered in the environment, that there was some electrostatic lift, because you have 9,000 ton stones at Yangshan quarry, and plus you pretty daggone big ones at Baalbek, and then they just stopped. They stopped making the obelisks, and they stopped making the pregnant stone, and they stopped making the 9,000 ton stone, and they stopped carving temples out of stone perfectly. And that's the megalithic period comes to mostly an end, and we go through a transition period. And in that transition period, there is still megalithic architecture, and there's some advanced engineering. There's a lot of beginnings of the religion. During the transition period, we have some of the best thinkers at that time. And then we get into the religious period, and mysteriously in the religious period, suddenly you have some more megalithic architecture, which can be quite mysterious, like the Kofuns in Japan, and you have a lot of the Hindu temples, and like Borobudur and stuff. And you have all the stuff in Mexico being built, and pyramids popping up again, even though the step pyramid phase is over. And they're bringing that religion back. I would say that that's because of the effect of Mars in reminding people of the father begetting the son, which then became the father who beget the next son. And then you have a new age of a warrior god, the one who wasn't shot by Ho Yi. And in Rome, they slayed 9 out of 10 bulls, so that there was one bull left. And then we got full into the religious period, and everything became about controlling the populace to keep people organized, and if they're going to war for specific reasons, political and economic reasons, going to war rather than just pillaging everywhere. Although there was a lot of pillage economy throughout the religious period, right up to the scientific period, and we're still kind of overlapping the two, where even science itself, people want to turn it into a religion, because religion is very different from government. It is something it's got a lot of continuity, and it evolves but slowly. And of course, these days anyone can start one, and it's become big business. So that means that the religious period has been extended into the scientific period, and there's not really yet proof that we will have a long-lasting scientific period. It may turn into more of a technology thing, in which case it'll be like Egypt and ancient China, brief and golden. And ancient China slipped away. They had systematic chemistry, and they had seismographs and compasses and all this stuff, and eventually it just became war and religion. And religion has its place and it has its use, but the one thing that it definitely demarcates is less interest in the actual explanations of things and where these things came from. The original religion being totally forgotten and kind of overwritten and layered with bureaucracy and superstition.
Yes.
And that is an unfortunate thing that causes the memory of the true events to go away, and yet they can't completely go away, as we saw with the power of Star Wars. Once we blew up the planet Venus, I mean, the whole except for China, everybody went crazy for it, and it's still not out of that. So you have all the motifs showing up again and again, and plus in the amusement parks, and I see them all the time. I mean, Alita Battle Warrior. You've got the floating city, you've got the angels, you've got a lot of archetypes that are in religion, and you've got the female warrior, and you've got the downfall of the male archetype of warrior. I mean, it's just unbelievable how it just doesn't seem to really go away. So how do we deal with that going forward? I think that we have to actually engineer a successful new religion out of that. But that new religion, what's it going to look like and what's it going to be based on? That's up in the air. I say egalitarian humanistic ethics, but at the same time, that's not a value that a lot of the world shares, and that I think people should need to be aware of that. I mean, in certain places in the world, they find egalitarian humanistic ethics to be a threat to their way of life. Not everybody is interpreting the new scientific period of mankind as a positive thing, or willing to embrace that new scientific period. And it's quite possible without an aurora borealis and sky spheres, which move about, and somehow we discern that means this and this means that, and this sphere struck that sphere, so that's what this means. That humanity's not going to know what to do. And one thing that we have is supposedly self-domestication. It might be also alien domestication, but some kind of domestication. So we'd like to be told what to do as a whole. I don't personally. I'm very I'm real bad about anti-authoritarian kind of proclivities, but the vast majority of people, they want to be told how to live, and all we've got is the moon and the sun. And neither one of them are currently talking to us. I mean, we don't interpret them in our daily lives. So that leaves really just books, and books can be interpreted, and they can be translated and changed and altered, and there's agendas and there's councils and there's conspiracies and there's secret vaults in the Vatican, and it creates a lot of confusion that originally there was none, and everybody around the entire world knew exactly who the Lord was. The Lord was a Saturnian fertility god, and then was replaced by his son, who beat him in a wrestling contest and castrated him. And then that body, that soul, let's say a few hundred to 1,000 years, became the sister wife of the new Thunder Lord, and Uranus just became a distant memory. I mean, Uranus was literally the plasma sky above the original glowing orb that was up there. I mean, that's long gone. But I see no reason why that would be anything but the Saturnian body.
Okay, so what was the original religion?
It would be that we were it would be such a religion that you wouldn't even really recognize as a religion. Everybody would know that star, that glowing midnight sun, was the God that was watching over us, the eye. And the Lord then also became his weapon, and his wrath, the thunderbolt, which was sometimes interpreted as a sword, sometimes a spear or a trident, but that was the power, which also was the representation. The power was the God at the same time, and that was a worldwide phenomenon. And then once there were multiple spheres, then that people started to differentiate their beliefs,
Yeah.
and some focused and some on another, which is totally natural. Mankind became befuddled and confused.
Okay. All right. Well, we can start now. That's it. That's all the questions.
Okay.
That's a lot. That
All
was
right.
quite a lot. Yeah.
That was quite a lot. You might want to make that into like a little
Oh, I will.
miniature. Yeah, a little miniature video.
Yeah, I think so. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? Please keep in mind that when I interview someone, I'm not out to debate them or cast my theories against theirs. I am merely interviewing them and getting their story. You know, I do have a few things that I'd like to add. I didn't want to interrupt him. He was rolling, and I've written him down here. Okay. We discussed quite a bit there, and I know he said something about Universal Sandbox 2. Well, I have Universal Sandbox 2, and it still doesn't include the electromagnetic force. So how can any reality be from that? It's with the most powerful force in the universe missing. I don't understand how gravity-only people don't understand that they need a feedback system. They just don't understand it. As far as the polar configuration goes, I think John Cook covered that pretty well in his video, Recovering the Lost World. I'm going to have you watch a short clip here. In essence, he says that once a planet is lost from the equator of the star, or the body it's orbiting, the only other alternative will be to be captured from the pole, because that's where the Birkeland current is coming and going from. And I think John Cook's video here explains it pretty well. It's just a couple minutes. Than the Earth's orbit today. The orbital period of Saturn was significantly reduced as a result. During the last 3 million year period, Saturn started scavenging its lost satellites, and perhaps solar system planets, all in orbit close to the Sun. The possibility of a captured planet again orbiting Saturn at its equator is virtually nil. Instead, the scavenged planets ended up in superpolar or subpolar locations, the only locations which seem to be dynamically stable. Because Saturn had come in from outside of the solar system, and most likely was a star originally, it would have been at a very high positive charge level, distinct from the solar system planets. Solar system planets would have been attracted to Saturn when Saturn entered the solar system, rather than be repelled, as would be the case of two planets with nearly equal values of charge. Saturn, with its stack of captured planets, was seen by hominids, Homo erectus, and recorded in the shapes of artifacts in the Paleolithic, and by humans, Homo sapiens, as carved images in the Upper Paleolithic from 30,000 BC, and by the hundreds of millions during the early Neolithic, 10,000 to 3,000 BC, when the stack of planets was much more frequently seen. At about 10,900 BC, Earth, at that time a planet of the Sun, made an electric field contact with Saturn, causing 1,500 years of darkness. Oh yeah, shadow on Earth. The period of darkness is recognized by many of the world's creation myths. Ramon mentions 3 planets that appear to be in a dance together, and that reminds me of this dance right here. One thing that kind of intrigued me about this little dance these girls are doing is the move they do where they're all kind of doing the same thing, and then the girl in the middle retreats to the back, and then a path opens up and she comes shooting through the middle. This, I'm thinking, could have perhaps happened with the planets in the sky, and this is where they get the whole motif from. Check it out.